This is the podcast, It's Not Easy to Be Green, and this is our first episode, the Mahopac Lithium Battery Storage Facility. We are filming in Mahopac, Carmel, New York, which is approximately 50 minutes north of New York City, and the surrounding towns include Somers, Yorktown, and Brewster. And the purpose of our podcast is to raise awareness of how renewable energy projects are truly not green and reliable, and really are in the infancy stage for solar, wind turbines, and the lithium battery storage facilities. They are being falsely promoted by government officials, energy companies, and manufacturers, and are being seen as the savior to the climate change crisis. However, at this point in time, it couldn't be further from the truth. So let's do a quick introduction. My name is Dominique, and I have lived in Mahopac for only 1 year, originally from Monmouth County, New Jersey, where in that region they're experiencing huge problems from wind turbines. But I digress. I'm a mother of 3 young children, and my profession is of a cytologist, which is a scientist, essentially similar to a pathologist. And I study using the microscope the cellular morphology of specimens, and I'm able to use my skill to diagnose infectious processes and cancers. And here to my left is Christine. Please introduce yourself, Christine, for our listeners.
So I'm Christine Panos, and I have worked as a history teacher for most of my career. And as a result of my background, I decided to look into if there were any other cases in which energy development was forced or on towns and cities. And the best example I could find was the railroad industry, which was given great control over land, eminent domain. In 1862, companies were given 30-year loans at 6% interest to construct the transcontinental railroad line. In addition, the companies were granted 6,400 acres of land per mile of line completed. They were also allowed to trade that land. If that land didn't have timber that they needed, they could trade it for land elsewhere. So, of course, in 1864, the U.S. was less settled, and this was less of a problem. But now, fast forward to 2024, and that is not the case. So more people, farmland, and wildlife habitat will have to be displaced for wind, solar, high-power transmission lines, and BESS facilities. For example, in July of 2024, the Greenbelt Express, a high-power transmission line cutting through Kansas and Missouri, is 542 miles. And family farms were taken by eminent domain in Missouri. And it got so bad that the state legislature had to pass a law that those landowners would have to be compensated for the land that was taken for this project.
So that brings us to our current state of affairs. So let's get to the heart of our episode, the Mahopac Lithium Battery Storage Facility. I personally had heard about it approximately a month and a half after the community members had started their quest about fighting against the proposal of the storage facility. My husband happened to bring a local newspaper back to the house after shopping, and there on the front page, I saw the article with pictures from members of the community protesting outside the Olympic Diner, I think it was. What about you, Christine? How did you learn of the proposal for the lithium battery storage facility?
We learned about this from our neighbors on Lounsbury because on Miller Road there was a sign posted which was very vague, and one of our neighbors, Stephanie, looked into it and called the town and found out, to her surprise, that they were proposing a battery storage facility essentially in her backyard. Her home abuts the development site.
So it's approximately about 200 feet from the proposed site.
Yes.
Let's talk about the brief synopsis of the facility in Mahopac. Where will it be located, and what entity owns that land?
So it's located on 24 Miller Road. It's 95 acres. 45 of those acres will be developed. Much of the acreage is wetlands. The land is owned by an LLC. which is a group of individuals owning the lands which are protected by an LLC so that they cannot be individually sued if there is a problem or a fire in this area from the facility. The developer is East Point Energy.
Right. So, can you give a brief background of this company, East Point Energy?
East Point Energy is owned by Equinor, which is a company largely owned by the country of Norway. They are in the development of renewable energy, but most of their wealth was created in drilling for oil. So the way they sort of compensate for the drilling of oil is that they develop renewable energy as well, and that gives them points to offset their oil drilling. The company East Point Energy is out of Virginia, and they are going to lease the land, which means that the LLC is going to be making money every month from the rental of this
I
land.
heard, I think, about 25 years was
Yes.
the lease.
Yeah.
Now, how big is the proposal of this storage facility, and does it actually produce any energy? What is the basic functionality of it?
So the functionality of energy storage is to store energy when renewable energy is not working. So when solar doesn't work at night, or the wind is not blowing, or it is raining out, the energy storage will be used to give back to the grid. When renewable energy is working well and producing a lot, it stores the excess. However, it doesn't produce anything. And if you look at battery storage, the batteries themselves are lithium batteries, and they need to be kept at a constant temperature 24 hours a day, requiring HVAC systems for heating and cooling. What I cannot find is how much energy is being used to protect these batteries in order that they can do their job in storing energy. So it would seem to me that this should have been one of the first questions asked, but I cannot find the answer. Is this because we will find that battery storage systems expend more energy in heating and cooling of the batteries than the energy the battery stores? Is this why a study has not been done? Will we find that it is utterly cost ineffective and in fact wasteful of energy? As Americans, we should be smarter and not just take the energy company's salesman's word that this technology is needed. Without an answer to this question, arrived at independently of the energy companies, it is foolish to move forward with this technology and allocate our hard-earned tax dollars to implementing battery storage. I call on our citizens to demand an answer to this question, which seems to be fundamental.
Right. Seems short of a scam, right?
Yes.
So let's get back to the land of the 95 acres of land. What does this land consist of, and does it include any vulnerable wildlife?
Okay, so the land is 95 acres of undeveloped forest canopy trees, and it sits on wetland. The proposal that I read when the company went before the Environmental and Conservation Board said that they were going to clear cut 45 acres. This site provides for breeding, foraging, and shelter habitats for birds and mammals, including the endangered northern long-eared bat, the threatened bog turtle, that will all lose habitat if constructed. The Fish and Wildlife Service has reminded the company of Executive Order 13186, which provides for the protection of both migratory birds and bird habitat. Of the 10 bird species that are identified of particular note are the bald eagle, which is present in the area much of the year, and the black-capped chickadee.
So, also one of the most important points to get across and to emphasize is that this is not exclusively a local problem, but a multi-county and probably a problem for New York City. Any water contamination from the proposed land on 24 Miller Road will feed the watershed of New York City. Specifically from this location, the water travels from Mahopac Reservoir flowing south to the Muscoot River. The water then enters the New Crone Reservoir to Jerome Park Reservoir in the Bronx, and where it is then distributed to the Bronx and northern Manhattan. Speaking of water contamination, um, how would this happen? I know there's a thermal runaway phenomenon that is closely associated with this type of storage facility. Could you explain what a thermal runaway is and how it is resolved?
So a thermal runaway occurs when one cell in a battery fails and precipitates a chain reaction in which other batteries next to it fail, other cells next to it, and the batteries fail, um, and it starts an uncontrollable chain reaction and heating state. And this can happen when a battery is overcharged. It can happen because there's a lightning strike, a weather event. It could happen because water seeps into the battery storage system. And the result is an uncontrollable fire that cannot be put out. And the fire releases toxic gases such as hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen methane, ethylene, and carbon monoxide. The release of these gases, in turn, can lead to further explosions or ignition. And in fact, the chemical energy that is released by these fires is 20 times higher than the capacity of the energy stored. This could be devastating for a community that lives right next to it. And you wanted to talk about some of the problems with the PFAS?
Right. So we'll talk about what chemicals are released both from during the off gassing from these fires and from the mitigation, quote unquote, mitigation from the water contamination. I know specifically from PFAS, the forever chemicals that are released into the groundwater. These are a large chemical family of over 10,000 highly persistent chemicals that don't occur in nature. So they're synthetic and they hardly degrade in the natural environment. So they can be found in the blood and breast milk of humans and wildlife. They're very toxic. They're shown to interfere with the hormonal system. So they're called also endocrine disruptors, and they also interfere with the reproduction system and the development of the fetus, the impact of the immune system, and they promote the development of certain cancers. PFAS are very mobile in water as well, and that means once they're released into the environment, they migrate in the water and they remain intact for long periods of time. And to actually remove PFAS from the environment is extremely challenging and nearly impossible. And PFAS, they cause epigenetic changes in the DNA, such as DNA methylation. And this affects gene expression and future health outcomes for a person. So, go back to what specific chemicals are released and what their acute effects are from these chemicals that are released from the off gassing.
Okay, so from the off gassing and the fire that a BESS facility could produce, HF is the gas of biggest concern. So, hydrogen fluoride is a substance that's regulated by OSHA. OSHA is also a member of the interagency team that investigated the three fires of the summer of 2023 that occurred in New York. This agency, in their investigation, never checked for levels of HF. HF causes lung damage if inhaled, and if you inhale enough, it will lead to death. Even small splashes of high concentrated hydrogen fluoride can produce a fatal reaction. So the fact that this was not tested for is of great concern. HF also persists in the atmosphere as it is picked up by clouds and forms acid rain. So that could affect many areas outside of just the area that is burning. And you wanted to talk a little bit about the surrounding
Right.
areas.
So, not if. as Christine just said, there's 3 incidences alone in 2023, the summer of 2023. So it's not if, but when there's an incident, a toxic plume of this poisonous gas, largely consisting of hydrogen fluoride, being the major one. There's, I think, at least 30 registered community centers within that 5 mile radius of the proposed facility, such as daycare, senior care centers, grocery stores, schools, and not to mention this is an area of a lot of residents, private property owners, and like Christine and I have said before, very briefly, that there's a development that is literally 200 feet from the proposed site. So these, like I mentioned, all these centers and all these homeowners, they're going to have to shelter in place. So what would shelter in place entail?
Okay, if it is at a school, the children would not be allowed to leave school. All of the um, air filters and air conditioning system or the heating system in the winter would have to be turned off, and the windows closed. If you're in your house, the same thing would have to occur. After the fire, um, you would have to have all those filters changed and you would have to do a professional cleaning. For example, when we had the fire in Warwick in the summer of 2023, the school turned off the air handlers, and then they did not swipe for HF residue, so we don't know if it got into the schoolrooms. They swipe for heavy chemicals, um, for heavy metals, but not for HF. But they did have the school professionally cleaned, and all the air filters were changed. They did not check the water, the well water in the area for contamination after this fire, because they said that they used no water to put out the fire, they just let it burn. But we know that HF is picked up in the atmosphere and becomes acid rain. So it does travel outside of its original destination.
And I would say, I mean, I know my house, we're well water. So the majority of people here use well water.
Yep.
Yeah.
So do we.
So you briefly mentioned about the 3 incidents. So there have been other lithium storage facilities that have experienced this catastrophic fate of igniting and exploding from a thermal runaway. Are there a few that you'd like to list and talk about?
Okay, so we have three that experienced this in New York. And that would be in Warwick, which was 12 megawatts, East Hampton, which was 5 megawatts of storage. Um, and we also have a much larger facility in Otay Mesa, California, that went up this summer that burned for 17 days. Right now, New York State is set to unroll grid scale BESS with the 116 megawatt BESS storage facility proposed in Mahopac, but they also want to put a 275 megawatt facility on Long Island in Glenwood Landing, and another large scale BESS facility in Queens as well.
In Queens.
Yes, in
One of the-
Astoria.
Okay. And I don't know much about Queens, but I think they're pretty like congested
Yes.
there. Okay.
If they had a thermal runway there, it would be catastrophic for the population.
And I'm going to assume not a lot of people know about that.
No.
No.
This New York City has its own program called the City of Yes, which allows for the siting of these things and basically takes the siting of these facilities out of the hands of the residents or towns in which they're going to go in there, because City Hall controls it.
Right. So we're going to touch very briefly about the elimination of local control. So why especially Queens, why are these facilities and other renewable energy models just popping up all over New York and the East Coast, and if not the country, because you just spoke about Otay Mesa, but specifically why New York State? To me, it seems very well orchestrated, planned. I know Governor Kathy Hochul has announced a new framework for the state to achieve a nation leading 6 gigawatt of energy storage by 2030. And the goal is to generate 70% of the state's electricity from renewables by 2030 and to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. Would you like to expand on this topic in regards to the electrification of New York?
So everything is tied together. So in order to make these renewables work throughout the state, we have large scale solar upstate where there's lots of room. They need the best facilities to store the energy when it's not produced. On Long Island, they're focusing on putting wind storage, high density EMF cables, and battery storage. As I mentioned, the 275 megawatts that's proposed for Long Island. And all this will be connected with the EMF cables going from Long Island, coming up to Westchester, and then also being laid across the Hudson River.
Yeah, I just jerked when you said all connected because, we're focusing on this battery facility. Just we were saying, oh, in Mahopac, but it's like Christine said, it's all connected. Yes, we're storing electricity, but where does it go after it's stored? Right, it's storing it down during low peak hours, and then the energy company will um, release it and have them buy it during high demand hours at a premium. And so this is all connected. You have to look, past this. Look at the big picture.
Mhm.
So,
And we're not the only community that's being harmed by this. Solar panels release cadmium into the soil. Um, and of course, other communities throughout the state are being forced to accept the best facilities. And if a best facility is connected to a renewable energy source, aka wind or solar, it is covered under the Rapid Act, which means the town cannot um, deny the application. In fact, the company just goes to ORES, the Office of Renewable Energy, and they basically get their application rubber stamped.
right. So as of right now, Mahopac, their proposal is not connected to a renewable. But
Yes.
I would assume that the long-term plan is to connect that.
Yes, and that was the case with the bill for that Peter Harcum
Right.
introduced. And
So, Christine, as she had said, a bill that was sponsored by the New York State Senator of the 40th District, Peter Harcum, Bill S7834. This bill would have eliminated local control home rules, and it would have enabled the state to implement a battery storage facility regardless of the location, residential or industrial. And it is election year, so many of us, the community was very upset about this, and Harcum received an overwhelming amount of backlash from this bill, and so it was stricken down the bill. And like I said in the beginning of my introduction, I've only been here for a year, so I haven't really been involved in local politics. So I didn't even know who Peter Harcum was. But because of this happening, it made me aware of who he was and what he stands for or what he doesn't stand for. And it caused me to, it opened up my eyes and it implored me to do my own research. So I want to thank him for that because if it wasn't for my eyes would have not been open to this. And now I know what's going on. So when I was doing my own research, I came across his opponent, who's running against him this year. It's election year, Gina Arena, and she's been at numerous events with myself, Christine, and the other members of this community in opposition to the battery facility. She's been at our protests. She's been at board meetings. She's been at the public hearing for the moratorium. She's made official statements against it, and she's all about preserving home rule, which, local control needs to be preserved. It needs to be maintained. Because what do you have then if you don't have, you can't control your own?
well, then we're going to be like New York City, where things are just mandated and put in place, and you wake up one day and you wake up to a battery storage facility next to you that you didn't even know was going in.
Right. It's out of control, in my opinion. It's out of control. You have no rights at that point.
Yep.
So, would you like to include any? I just spoke about Gina Arena just now. Is there any other public officials that have spoken out against this, or that you'd like to talk about?
So Matt Slater has also spoken about this, and he's currently writing legislation for New York to protect our watershed because currently our watershed is not protected from this. And since this facility is being proposed to be put on New York City watershed, it's really highly important that we get this protected because HF, when water is applied to it, becomes hydrofluoric acid, which is highly corrosive enough to dissolve concrete. So obviously we do not want that in our water.
So, right now, in regard to the Mahopac lithium battery facility, we have a 6-month moratorium that was put in place. What are the next steps? And if someone would like to get involved, where could they go to find more information?
Okay, to find more information, we have 2 Facebook pages we're recommending. Stop the Lithium Battery Farms in Our Backyard for Mahopac and Somers, and then All Towns Against the Rapid Act. In addition to those Facebook pages, we have a couple of important dates to highlight. On the 18th of September, there's going to be a public hearing on the zoning portion of the comprehensive plan that Mahopac will be adopting. The meeting's at 7 o'clock at the Carmel Town Hall, and it's important for people to attend because we want to make sure that in the new comprehensive plan that grid scale battery storage will not be allowed in Mahopac and therefore precluding East Point Energy from continuing their application to build this plant. We also have another interesting date. So to go along with the governor's interagency fire committee that was set up after the fires of the summer of 2023, new code has been written for the BESS facilities. However, that code is rather lacking in setbacks and how can you write fire code for first responders when you did not check the levels of HF gas that was being produced. So the codes are inadequate. And
to say the least.
Yeah. So there is an open comment section that you can, until September 25th, voice your opinion about the codes that they recommend. And we will put that information at the end of this podcast up so you can either call or write or email the proper authorities about your opinion about these new fire codes that they are going to institute. And to have the agency that did such a bad job on investigating the fire write the fire codes, I think is a travesty.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. Doing a bad job. I would say a corrupt job. Breaking news, right?
Yes.
Here first. So in our next episode, episode 2, we'd like to expand on the state legislation that has led to the proliferation of solar, wind, and battery storage facilities across the state. And lastly, we would like to thank you for watching. It's not easy to be green. Thank you.
Thank you.